Bhagwan Vishnupad Srila Bhakti Pavan Janardan Maharaj Ki Jai.
Bandeham Shri Guru Shri Yatha Parakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavam Sya Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sagana Raghunatam Vitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parijana Saitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Paran Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakam Vitam Sya Om Agyana Timaranda Shya Gyanajana Shalakya Chakshurun Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namah Gurva Bhistam Supurakam Gurganara Sisha Sambhushitam Chintya Chintya Samasta Veda Nipunam Shirupa Patanugam Govinda Bidam Ujwalam Varatanum Bhaktyan Vidam Sundaram Bande Vishwa Gurun Shah Dibyad Bhagavad Prem Nawe Bija Pranam Devam Dibyad Tanum Suchanda Varanam Balarka Chelanchitam Sandrananda Puram Sareka Varanam Vairagya Vidyamburim Sri Siddhanta Nidhim Subhakti Lasitam Saraswatanam Varam Bandetam Shubharam Mareka Sharanam Nyashishvara Sridharam Vanshakopatarubyascha Kripa Sindhu Bhyevacha Patitanam Pavanibhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namah Namo Mahabharanyaya Krishna Prema Pradayate Krishnaya Krishna Chaitanya Namane Gauratavishe Namah. So we're hearing from Srimad Bhagavad Gita, the hidden treasure of the sweet absolute. Translation and commentary by Srila Bhakti Rakshak Sridhar Dev-Goswami Maharaj, and translated from Sanskrit and Bengali to English by Sripad Bhaktiananda Sagar. This is chapter 17, Shraddhatraya-vibhaga-yoga. Shraddhatraya-vibhaga-yoga, the three types of faith. Arjuna Vacha Ye Shastra Vidim Utsrijya Yajante Shraddhayan Vita Tesham Nishta Tukha Krishna Sattvam Aho Rajastama. Arjuna inquired, O Krishna, what is the position of those who worship with faith but ignore the injunctions of the scriptures? Is their faith in the mode of goodness, passion, or ignorance? O Krishna, what is the position of those who worship with faith but ignore the injunctions of the scriptures? Is their faith in the mode of goodness, passion, or ignorance? Shri Bhagavanu Vacha Trivida Bhavati Shraddha Dehinam Sasvabhavaja Satviki Rajasi Chaiva Tamasi Cheti Tam Shrinu. The Supreme Lord said, faith is of three types, born of the embodied soul's acquired nature, whether good, passionate, or ignorant. Now hear of this. The Supreme Lord said, faith is of three types, born of the embodied soul's acquired nature, whether good, passionate, or ignorant. Now hear of this. Sattvanurupa sarvasya shraddha bhavati bharata shraddhamayoyam purusho yo yach shraddha sa eva sa. O Bharata, the faith of all living beings is governed by their consciousness. The living being possesses faith by constitution. He is that which his faith is. O Bharata, the faith of all living beings is governed by their consciousness. The living being possesses faith by constitution. He is that which his faith is. Yajante satvika devan yaksha rakshamsi rajasa pretan bhuta ganams chanye yajante tamasa jana. Persons with faith of the nature of goodness worship the demigods. Persons with faith of a passionate nature worship the yaksha demigods and rakshasa demons, while those with faith of the nature of ignorance worship the ghosts and spirits. Persons with faith of the nature of goodness worship the demigods. Persons with faith of a passionate nature worship the yaksha demigods and rakshasa demons, while those with faith of the nature of ignorance worship the ghosts and spirits. So Krishna is explaining that everyone has a particular kind of faith which is a result or which is born of their nature. So he's saying that basically that according to our consciousness, we're going to have a particular faith. Now, normally, those who are in the mode of goodness, they'll worship demigods, and they'll perform different rituals and different rites to satisfy the demigods, hoping to better their position in life. Persons with the faith of passion worship the yaksha demigods and rakshasa demigods. We're told that the lord of the yakshas is Kuvera, which is, you could say, the treasure of the demigods, and the rakshasa demons, they also worship them. We can see that the rakshasas, they are sometimes related with Lord Ramachandra's present Sri Lanka. Ravana was there, and he was the leader of the Rakshasas. So those of a passionate nature worship the yaksha demigods and Rakshasa demons, while those with faith of the nature of ignorance worship the ghosts and spirits. And we've seen many places where people worship ghosts and different kinds of phantasmagoric spirits. I have been to Brazil, for instance, and there's a major kind of worship that goes there. It's called macumba. It's literally worship of ghosts. And they even have doctors who perform mystic surgeries in this directed by this kind of ghost worship. So it's a different kind of culture, and that a lot of that comes from. We see this kind of ghost worship in Haiti. There's ghost worship in Brazil. That a lot of that originally came from Nigeria or other places, but it is very big there in Brazil, that macumba, worship of ghosts. So here Krishna says, persons with faith of the nature of goodness worship the demigods. Persons with faith of a passionate nature worship the yaksha demigods and rakshasa demons, while those with faith of the nature of ignorance worship the ghosts and spirits. Karshayanta shadirastam bhuta gramam achedasa mam chaivanta shadirastam. Wait, I have to go back. Ashastra vihitam goram tapyante jay tapojana dambakara samyuk damba hankara samyukta kamaraga balanvita ashastra vihitam goram tapyante ye tapojana damba hankara samyukta kamaraga balanvita karshayanta shadirastam bhutagramam achedasa mam shaivanta sharirastam tanvidi asuram nischayan karshayanta sharirastam bhutagramam achedasa mamshayvanta sharirastam tanvidi asura nischayan. Full of pride and egoism, motivated by ambition, attachment, and power, ignorant persons perform severe austerities unsanctioned by the scriptures and torture the body's natural elements and the soul within. Know them to be of demoniacal faith. So, full of pride and egoism, motivated by ambition, attachment, and power, ignorant persons perform severe austerities unsanctioned by the scriptures and torture the body's natural elements and the soul within. Know them to be of demoniacal faith. So I mentioned the worship of ghosts, and just like the proud Brahmins of Navadip, they tried to cause some blemish to falsely tried to frame Srivas Thakur, putting out articles of Bhavani there, which had included a bottle of wine and other tantric worships. So that's also of that nature. Also, as I was talking about Brazil, it's all related to tantric worship, and it also has offering of wine, offering of blood of animals. Now here it says, continuing, full of pride and egoism, motivated by ambition, attachment, and power, ignorant persons perform severe austerities unsanctioned by the scriptures and torture the body's natural elements and the soul within. Know them to be of demoniacal faith. And one of the prime examples of that is Hiranyakashipu, who was executing severe austerities only for the purpose of trying to falsely attain immortality. So he's executing austerities, he's torturing the elements of the body so much that all the flesh of his body was consumed by ants and insects, and he was living within the bones, within his bones, in the marrow of his bones, but that was leading to great power as some tejas, some fire emanating from his body, so that Lord Brahma came down to satisfy or give some boon to Hiranyakashipu, and he asked for immortality. But Lord Brahma said, even I don't have immortality, so how will I give this to you? And then Hiranyakashipu thought that Lord Brahma was withholding some gift to him, or some boon to him. So he asked for all these other things that he thought would equal immortality, like not dying when inside or outside, day or night, by any weapons, by man or beast, and like so many conditions, just like trying to write little clauses, like we hear sometimes when they announce when some products are announced. At the end, they say, "Offer may not apply to this and this and that." So Hiranyakashipu is trying to create all these little circumstances which will give him his goal of immortality and to be able to conquer the demigods and to ultimately kill Lord Vishnu. So he created, and almost you can say he did achieve great power by the boons of Lord Brahma, but ultimately, although all his conditions were met, he was still, as one would expect, he was ultimately killed by Lord Nrsimhadeva. We also hear that sometimes Lord Shiva, he's known as Asutosh, and he's sometimes very eager to give different asuras some benediction when they execute some kind of torturous austerities. So one person who was a demon somehow or other satisfied Lord Shiva, and then Lord Shiva asked what gift he wanted, and he said, I want the gift that whoever's head I touch, their head will split in half or explode. So Lord Shiva granted that gift, and immediately the demon wanted to test his gift on Lord Shiva. So he's running after him. And Lord Shiva's running, and then Lord Vishnu appeared as a young boy. And Lord Vishnu came and said, Oh demon, where are you going? Why are you running so fast? And the demon said, I'm trying to catch Lord Shiva. He granted me the benediction that whoever's head I touch will explode. So I wanted to test it on him. And then Lord Vishnu laughed and said, Oh, do you really believe that? Lord Shiva is making all these promises so often, and you can't really confide in what he says. Lord Vishnu said, if you really wonder whether he could grant you this benediction that whoever's head you touch will explode, touch your own head. That's a way of finding out. So the demon did. He touched his own head, and his own head exploded. So sometimes the demons, like it said in this verse, it says, full of pride and egoism, motivated by ambition, attachment and power, ignorant persons perform severe austerities unsanctioned by the scriptures and torture the body's natural elements in the soul within. Know them to be of demoniacal faith. Aharas tvapi sarvasya trivido bhavati priya yagyas tapas tatadhanam tesham bedam imam shrinu. According to the three modes of material nature, there are also three kinds of food preference. In the same way, there are three kinds of sacrifice, three kinds of austerities, and three kinds of charity. Now hear of these. So according to the three modes of material nature, there are also three kinds of food preference. In the same way, there are three kinds of sacrifice, three kinds of austerity, and three kinds of charity. Now hear of these. Now we're going to hear of food in the nature of goodness, in the nature of passion, in the nature of ignorance, corresponding to the three modes of nature. Similarly, different kinds of sacrifice, what sacrifices people are making and what is important to them that they are engaged in sacrifice, the different kinds of austerities that they'll undergo, and for what goals, and three kinds of charity, who they're offering charity to. Because we see, even in the scriptures, there are persons who are demons, but they're still giving charity. They give charity just out of some kind of natural pride, or sometimes even the demons are worshiping. We see they're worshiping Lord Vishnu, but they cannot recognize Krishna when he's present. So anyway, according to the three modes of material nature, there are also three kinds of food preference. In the same way, there are three kinds of sacrifice, three kinds of austerity, and three kinds of charity. Now hear of these. 8. Let's see. Ayu sattva bala rogyas sukha priti vivardhana rasha snigdha stira ridya ahara sattvika priya. Foods that increase longevity, vitality, strength, health, happiness, and loving kindness, and which are tasty, succulent, wholesome, and pleasant are dear to persons of the nature of goodness. Foods that increase longevity. In other words, they're so much in the mode of goodness, they'll increase the duration of your life. They're that healthy. Foods that increase longevity, vitality, which will give you energy, strength, health, which will increase your strength, your bodily strength and your health. Also, which will lead to increased happiness. They'll make you feel happy and pleasant, and loving kindness. This will lead to your natural balanced nature, and which are tasty, succulent, wholesome, and pleasant, are dear to persons of the nature of goodness. Foods that increase longevity, vitality, strength, health, happiness, and loving kindness, and which are tasty, succulent, wholesome, and pleasant, are dear to persons of the nature of goodness. So that was Ayu Sattva Bala Rogya Sukha Priti Vivardhana Rasya Snigdha Stira Ridya Ahara Sattvika Priya. Katvamla Lavanati Ushna Tikshna Ruksha Vidahina Ahara Rajas Sasyeshta Dukkha Shoka Maya Prada. Katvamla Lavanati Ushna Tikshna Ruksha Vidahina Ahara Rajasas Yeshta Dukkha Shoka Maya Prada. Foods dear to persons of passionate nature are too bitter, neem, etc., too sour, too salty, too hot, too pungent, chili pepper, etc., too dry roasted chickpeas, etc., and too heating mustard seed, etc. Such foods cause pain, sorrow, and illness. Foods dear to persons of passionate nature are too bitter, neem, etc., too sour, too salty, too hot, too pungent, chili, pepper, etc., too dry roasted chickpeas, etc., and too heating mustard seed, etc. Such foods cause pain, sorrow, and illness. Now, what we should remember also is that we've seen that when persons, for instance, when we're visiting in the mat, they serve on a plate. There are 4 different kinds of tastes generally. They start out with something bitter, and there's bitter, and then there's what are the 4 different kinds of taste that they're bitter? Then at the end of the meal, there's sweet, and then there's also, what's that? Well, yes, but I don't know specifically that they're offering something salty. I know they start with something bitter, then they have a vegetable, then they have something with a little heat, like something like a chutney, then they have something with sweet. So they have different kinds of taste. It's not all one kind of taste. But here we see if someone's eating predominantly, if they're of the nature of Rajaguna, passion, we've seen they'll eat foods which are unbalanced. For instance, foods dear to persons of passionate nature are too bitter, neem, etc., too sour. So that was bitter, sweet, pungent, or hot, and sweet. But there's all kind of, the meal should consist of different natures of food. It shouldn't be of one. So foods dear to person of passionate nature are too bitter, neem, too sour, too salty, too hot, too pungent, chili pepper, etc., too dry roasted chickpeas, etc., and too heating, mustard seed, etc. Such foods cause pain, sorrow, and illness. And those kind of foods can cause that pain. One can feel pain within after eating. That one feels different forms of pain in their stomach. They can feel some pain. I remember one time I was with Srila Govinda Maharaj, and this was a very different occasion. We had to go to different persons' houses and eat 2 dinners, basically. We were visiting people and we were preaching to them, and somehow or other we had to take 2 dinners. So we took 1 dinner and ate moderately, but then after eating, within an hour, had to eat another dinner. And as soon as I ate there, and we all were eating, it was a special situation we were in. As soon as I was eating, I felt very strongly like just so much pain. And then someone gave me some Ayurvedic medicine, green liquid. It was called Pudinhara. And they gave me this little bottle, and they said, drink this, because they could see I was in great pain. And I drank that little bottle, and immediately, within a minute, all my pain was gone. It was just like something all of a sudden in my stomach. It just felt like gears shifting, like clank. And then all of a sudden, like all the activity in my stomach, which was painful, just stopped. And I remember that. But like you can see, foods dear to persons of passionate nature are too bitter, neem, too sour, too salty, too hot, too pungent, chili pepper, etc., too dry roasted chickpeas, etc., and too heating, mustard seed, etc. Such foods cause pain, sorrow, and illness. Then we continue. Yata yamam gata rasam, yata yamam gata rasam, puti paryushitam chayat, uchishtam api chamedyam bhojanam tamasapriyam. Dear to the ignorant are foods that are stale, tasteless, foul-smelling, or were cooked the day before, remnants, others than that of worshipable persons, and impure foods such as meat, wine, and onions. Dear to the ignorant are foods that are stale, tasteless, foul-smelling, or were cooked the day before, remnants others than that of worshipable persons, and impure foods such as meat, wine, and onions. So remnants touched by other people, those, when you're in Bengal, that's called juta, which is interesting. That name juta also refers to someone's shoes. Those are called juta. But juta also refers to food that's been half-eaten or touched by someone else. Now, people won't eat that generally. So, dear to the ignorant are foods that are stale. Of course, all this criterion is different than it's different when you're taking prasadam. Prasadam, and there are verses that say you should immediately take prasadam, and it doesn't matter if it comes from far away. In other words, it's taken time to get there. It may not be fresh. But for instance, persons will be returning from India, they'll bring us Jagannath Prasad. We'll take that even though it may be several weeks old. Generally, they bring some kind of like flaky there, like some kind of like fried fried things or some kind of sweets that are offered to Lord Jagannath, then it doesn't matter. These principles don't refer to prasadam or mahaprasadam. We consider ourselves fortunate if someone brings us some mahaprasadam, or they say this was taken by Gurudev, and then we'll happily honor that. Sometimes they even bring us a little, I've seen little tiny colored cloth sack that they say that is prasadam, and it's actually uncooked rice, and we'll take that. So, but dear to the ignorant are foods that are stale, tasteless, foul-smelling, or were cooked the day before, remnants other than that of worshipable persons, and impure foods such as meat, wine, and onions. It's interesting today also, the day in which we're living, people put food in their refrigerator and it keeps for several days, and then they'll warm it up, and but here it's not considered. It's considered that these foods are basically dear to the persons who are in tamagun. They're old. They're stale means they're old. They're tasteless. They're foul-smelling or were cooked the day before. They're remnants other than that of worshipable persons, and impure foods such as meat, wine, and onions. Afal lakang shibir yagyo vididishto ya ijate yashtavyam eveti mana samadaya sasatvika. Ava lakang shibir yagyo vididishto ya ijate yastavyam eveti mana samadayas sasatvika. That sacrifice, which is in accordance with scriptural injunctions and faithfully performed by a person free from fruitive desire, is sacrifice of the nature of goodness. That sacrifice, which is in accordance with scriptural injunctions and faithfully performed by a person free from fruitive desire, is sacrifice of the nature of goodness. And actually it is said, Yagya Vai Vishnu, sacrifice is meant to please the Lord. We are sacrificing. Everything we do is ultimately a sacrifice to please the Lord. That should be the real nature of a sacrifice. And without being attached to the results, that many times we'll do some sacrifice. For instance, when somebody is given Gayatri initiation and Brahman thread, then there'll be a sacrifice, a fire sacrifice for them, or when the deities are installed, or like that, when there's a special occasion. Then that sacrifice, which is in accordance with scriptural injunctions and faithfully performed by a person free from fruitive desire, is sacrifice of the nature of goodness. Abhisandaya tufalam dambartam apichaivayat ijjate bharata shrestha tam yagyam vidirajasam. Abhisandhaya tufalam dambartam apichaivayat ijjate bharata shrestha tam yagyam vidirajasam. But, O Bharata, know that sacrifice which is performed in fruitive expectation and as a display of pomp and grandeur is sacrifice of the nature of passion. But, O Bharata, know that sacrifice which is performed in fruitive expectation and as a display of pomp and grandeur is sacrifice of the nature of passion. So the sacrifice is being performed, but it's being performed, for instance, to gain one some facility. For instance, when Krishna was present, the demigod, when Krishna was present, the residents of Vrindavan were worshiping Indra, and they expected that would be very good for their profession, which was taking care of the cows, and they earned their living by the cows and what the cows were producing. Butter and ghee and so many products from the cow. So they were thinking that if we worship Indra, we'll get some reward by Indra will supply us with good rain and nice grasses and everything that will be favorable for the cows. But they were doing so with the expectation of some result which would be beneficial to them. Now here, that's a little different because they are still the residents of Vrindavan, they're Krishna's devotees, but here it mentions those who do sacrifice with the expectation, with some fruitive expectation, and as a display of pomp and grandeur. So that's in the nature of passion. But even so, Krishna stopped the worship of Indra because he wanted to establish, especially among his own devotees in Vrindavan, he wanted to establish that we will not be centered on anything external to that of the worship of the Lord and his devotees. Now Krishna can worship his devotees, and he often does so. We see that the very nature of the Bhagavad Gita is being spoken, and Krishna is driving the chariot of Arjuna. So Krishna is perfectly happy in serving his devotees. But he wanted to establish among the residents of Vrindavan that there's no need for some external consideration. You don't need to worship Indra for some material result. And of course, Indra became enraged when they stopped with his worship, and he tried to flood all of Vrindavan, which led Krishna to lift Govardhan, the Govardhan hill, to protect his devotees. So, but O Bharata, know that sacrifice, which is performed in fruitive expectation and is a display of pomp and grandeur, is sacrifice of the nature of passion. And Deva Dvija Guru Pragya Pujanam Shocham Arjavam Brahmacharyam Ahimsacha. Pardon me. I should. Vidihinam Asrishtanam Mantrahinam Adakshinam Shraddha Virahitam Yagyam Tamasam Parichakshate. Vidihinam Asrishtanam Mantrahinam Adakshinam Shraddha Virahitam Yagyam Tamasam Parichakshate. And that sacrifice which ignores the injunctions of the scriptures, which is performed without the distribution of foodstuffs, without uttering the appropriate mantras, without offerings to the priest, and without faith, is known as sacrifice in ignorance. And that sacrifice which ignores the injunctions of the scriptures, which is performed without the distribution of foodstuffs, without uttering the appropriate mantras, without offering to the priest, and without faith, is known as sacrifice in ignorance. So we see here there are so many different kinds of worship so many different kinds of sacrifice, which are performed according to one's situation within the modes of nature. So as one is situated in the mode of goodness, there will be those forms of sacrifice, those forms of worship, which are the nature of goodness. And there are also those sacrifices which are done of goodness, which are done of passion, and which are done of ignorance. So here we've heard of the different sacrifices. That sacrifice which is in accordance with scriptural injunctions and faithfully performed by a person free from fruit of desire is sacrifice of the nature of goodness. But, O Bharata, know that sacrifice which is performed in fruit of expectation and is a display of pomp and grandeur is sacrifice of the nature of passion. And that sacrifice which ignores the injunctions of the scriptures, which is performed without the distribution of foodstuffs, without uttering the appropriate mantras, without offerings to the priest, and without faith, is known as sacrifice in ignorance. Deva Dvija Guru Pragya Pujanam Shocham Arjavam Brahmacharyam Ahimsam Cha Brahmacharyam Ahimsa Cha Shariram Tapa Uchate Deva Dvija Guru Pragya Pujanam Shocham Arjavam Brahmacharyam Ahimsa Cha Shariram Tapa Uchate. Worship of the deity, the Brahman, the spiritual master, and the enlightened soul, purity, simplicity, celibacy, and non-violence. These all constitute austerity of the body. Worship of the deity, the Brahman, the spiritual master, and the enlightened soul, purity, simplicity, celibacy, and non-violence. These all constitute austerity of the body. Anudvega karam vakyam satyam priya hitam chayat svadhyayab yasanam chaiva vanmayam tapa uchate. Anudvega karam vakyam satyam priya hitam chayat svadhyaya vyasanam chaiva vanmayam tapa uchate. Speech which does not disturb others, which is truthful, pleasing, yet beneficial, as well as regular recitation of the Vedas, all these are known as verbal austerity. Speech which does not disturb others, which is truthful, pleasing, yet beneficial, as well as regular recitation of the Vedas, all these are known as verbal austerity. So we heard first of bodily austerity, worship of the deity, the Brahman, the spiritual master, and the enlightened soul, purity, simplicity, celibacy, and non-violence. These all constitute austerity of the body. Speech which does not disturb others, which is truthful, pleasing, yet beneficial, as well as regular recitation of the Vedas, all these are known as verbal austerity. Mana prasada somyatvam monam atma vinigraha bhava samshudir iti etat tapo manasam uchate. Mana prasadas somyatvam monam atma vinigraha bhava samshudir iti etat tapo manasam uchate. Self-satisfaction, benevolence, stability, mental control, and pure-heartedness are all known as mental austerity. So we heard of bodily austerity, worship of the deity, the Brahman, the spiritual master, and the enlightened soul, purity, simplicity, celibacy, and non-violence. These all constitute austerity of the body. speech which does not disturb others, which is truthful, pleasing yet beneficial, as well as regular recitation of the Vedas. All these are known as verbal austerities. And here, manaprasada somyatvam monam atma vanigraha bhava sam shudir iti etat tapo manasam uchate. Self-satisfaction, benevolence, stability, mental control, and pure-heartedness are all known as mental austerity. So self-satisfaction, in other words, being satisfied in spiritual progression, spiritual service to the Lord and His devotees. Self-satisfaction. We're all trying to engage in what is the activities. Who is the real self? The self is a soul. We're trying to engage in those activities which are leading to this actual satisfaction of who we really are. Self-satisfaction, benevolence, stability, mental control, and pure-heartedness are all known as mental austerity. Shraddhatraya-vibhaga-yoga tapas tat trividam narai ashvala kangshibir yuktai satvikam parichakshate. When performed by a desireless, devout soul with deep faith in the Supreme Lord, this threefold austerity of thought, word, and deed is of the nature of goodness. When performed by a desireless, devout soul with deep faith in the Supreme Lord, this threefold austerity of thought, word, and deed is of the nature of goodness. So we heard about these three kinds of austerity, of the body, of the mind, and of the body, of the mind, and of, bodily austerity, verbal austerity, and mental austerity. Bodily austerity, verbal austerity, and mental austerity. These are the three kinds of austerities mentioned. And when performed by a desireless, devout soul with deep faith in the Supreme Lord, this threefold austerity of thought, word, and deed is of the nature of goodness. So, we'll continue there. Satkaramana pujartam tapodambena chaivayat kriyate tadiha proktam rajasam chalam adruvam. Satkaramana pujartam tapodambena chaivayat kriyate tadiha proktam rajasam chalam adruvam. That unenduring, transitory austerity which is proudly performed for the sake of gain, worship, name, and fame is known as austerity of the nature of passion. That unenduring, transitory austerity which is proudly performed for the sake of gain, worship, name, and fame is known as austerity of the nature of passion. So that will be performed for some transitory gain, and transitory in the sense that ultimately everyone comes into this world. Everyone has to ultimately leave this material body, and when one performs this transitory austerity, one may gain something in this world, but it will all be lost at the time of death. It will disappear. It will dissipate. That unenduring, transitory austerity which is proudly performed for the sake of gain, worship, name, and fame, is known as austerity of the nature of passion. And some persons will be very convinced in that austerity that they perform. They'll want to do so for the benefit of their name or fame or their country or their family, etc. So they'll engage in austerity. I've seen that, people who undergo severe austerity just to be able to benefit their friends or their family. I would see that. I lived in Bangkok, and there were many persons from I'm trying to remember the name of a place. It was a well-known place where the Gita press was situated. And there were many persons who came from poor families, and they were designated by their family to go to Thailand, and they accepted very, very menial jobs like as chokidars, which means night watchmen, and other things. Many of those persons were addicted to drinking, and yet they worked hard and they sent money home to their family so that their family could keep the family farm. They were very poor. Gita Press, where is that located in? I can't remember right offhand. I know though. And those persons, so that unenduring transitory austerity, which is proudly performed for the sake of gain, worship, name, and fame, is known as austerity of the nature of passion. And buddha grahenat manoyat pidaya kriyate tapa parayotsa dhanartam va tat tamasam udaritam. Now I remember that place is called Gorakhpur. Gorakhpur is in UP, where the Gita Press is. And many of those persons were poor, and they went to Thailand. They had no life of their own. They had no purity of their lives. They were menial jobs. They were drunkards. And yet their purpose was to just benefit their family. So and sometimes their own brother would beget children in their own wife while they were gone. But that unenduring transitory austerity, which is proudly performed for the sake of gain, worship, name, and fame, is known as austerity of the nature of passion. In other words, it's not performed for any pure purpose of satisfying the Lord and his devotees, but for some purpose of some gain, something. But still, that is of the nature of passion. They are doing so, and they hope to gain something of it. Ultimately, that will be transitory, but there may be some purpose in that. Then, muda grahenat manoyat pidaya kriyate tapa parashyot saranartam va tattamasam udaritam. That austerity which is performed with dubious intent, causing self-torture or meant to harm others, is known as austerity of the nature of ignorance. That austerity which is performed with dubious intent, causing self-torture or meant to harm others, is known as austerity of the nature of ignorance. So, of course, as we can understand and which we hear of in the Bhagavad Gita, it's not always that something is of the nature of pure goodness or pure passion or pure ignorance. Sometimes one mode of nature will become predominant and it will push down the other two modes of nature. And sometimes even among persons who are of the nature of goodness, the mode of passion or the mode of ignorance may predominate at any particular moment. Someone in the mode of, sometimes the mode of goodness overcomes passion and ignorance. Sometimes the mode of passion overcomes goodness and ignorance. And sometimes the mode of ignorance overcomes goodness and passion. So we don't necessarily see that the austerities that someone will perform or the sacrifice that someone will perform will be purely of the mode of ignorance or purely of the mode of passion or purely of the mode of goodness. Sometimes there will be mixtures according to one's nature, because we can see that it's not always that we can see some persons who are predominantly of the mode of goodness, but they may fall in passion or ignorance. But it is said that the devotees, they attain what is called the Vishuddha Sattva plane. Vishuddha Sattva means the plane of pure goodness, Vishuddha Sattva. Due to their, why is that? Because they're actually transcendental to the modes of nature, because devotion and bhakti is not really under the control of the modes of nature, especially for those who are pure souls. Now, of course, they will not necessarily assert themselves to be of that nature, purity and above the modes of nature and in Vishuddha Sattva. But we can see that despite their humility, they really are of that nature. As I mentioned, I heard Srila Govinda Maharaj say to Siddhanti Maharaj, he said, "Maharaj, we are all receiving our karma fall. We're all receiving the results of our activities." And yet we would say that in the case of, I would say both of them, both Govinda Maharaj and Siddhanti Maharaj, their nature was that they were engaged, especially we could say that obviously of Govinda Maharaj, that his nature had nothing to do with the modes of nature, the gunas, because he was dedicated in his service to the Lord and transcendental to any considerations of material nature. But I would also say that Siddhanti Maharaj was a special, very special soul. And yet, Govinda Maharaj, he commented towards when Siddhanti Maharaj called him towards the end, towards his last month in this world, Govinda Maharaj told him, "Maharaj, we're all getting our karma fall, the results of our karma." But we will not see really the devotee being under the laws of karma or subjected to the modes of material nature. So I'm going to stop here and Hari Harai Nama Krishna Jaravaya Nama Hari Harai Nama Krishna Jaravaya Nama Jaravaya Maravaya Keshavaya Nama Jaravaya Maravaya Keshavaya Nama Gopal Govinda Ram Shri Madhusudan Gopal Govinda Ram Shri Madhusudan Giridhari Gopinatha Marana Mohan Giridhari Gopinatha Marana Mohan Sri Chaitanya Nityananda Sri Advaita Chandra Sri Chaitanya Nityananda Sri Advaita Chandra Garadhara Shiva Sari Gora Bhakta Vrinda Garadhara Shiva Sari Gora Bhakta Vrinda Jai Rupa Sanatan Bhatta Raghunan Jai Rupa Sanatan Bhatta Raghunan Sri Jiva Gopala Bhatta Rasa Raghunan Sri Jiva Gopala Bhatta Rasa Raghunan H.I. Gosai Kori Charana Bandhan H.I. Gosai Kori Charana Bandhan Jaoite Vignana Shabishta Puran Jaite Vignana Shabisha Puran H.I. Gosai Jarmui Taradas H.I. Gosai Jarmui Taradas Kasavar Padarenu Mora Panchagras Kasavar Padarenu Mora Panchagras Kader Charana Sevi Bhakta Sanibas Kader Charana Sevi Bhakta Sanibas Janame Janame More Abhilas Janame Janame More Abhilas H.I. Gosai Jabe Braje Koilabas Shai Gosai Jabe Braje Koilabas Radha Krishna Nitya Lila Korila Prakash Radha Krishna Nitya Lila Anande Bolo Hari Bhaja Vrindavan Shri Guru Vaishnava Pade Majayaman Shri Guru Vaishnava Pad Padma Korea Harinam Sankirtana Kohe Naratamudam Shri Guru Vaishnava Pad Padma Koryas Harinam Sankirtana Kohe Naratamudas Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Nitai Gora Haribo 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 Hare Bol. Nitai Gora Hare Bol. Hare Bol. Hare Bol. Hare Bol. Jai Saparikara Shishi Guru Guranga Gandharvika Giridhari Jo Ki Jai. Jai Om Vishnupad Paramahansa Paravajakacharya Tara Sarasi Srimad Srila Bhakti Sundar Govinda Dev-Goswami Maharaj Ki Jai. Jai Om Vishnupad Paramahansa Paravajakacharya Tara Sarasi Srimad Srila Bhakti Rakshak Dev-Goswami Maharaj Ki Jai. Jai Bhagavan Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Goswami Thakur Ki Jai. Jai Om Vishnupad Srila Gaur Kishore Das Babaji Maharaj Ki Jai. Jai Om Vishnupad Srila Satchidananda Bhakti Vinod Thakur Ki Jai. Jai Om Vishnupad Vaishnava Sarvabhauma Srila Jagannath Das Babaji Maharaj Ki Jai. Rupanuga Guru Bharga Ki Jai. Namachari Srila Haridas Thakur Ki Jai. Shri Rupa Sanatana Bhatta Ragana, Shri Jiva Gopal Bhattadasa Ragana, Shad Goswami Prabhu Ki Jai, Premsiko Shri Krishna, Chaitanya Prabhu, Nityananda, Shri Advaita Gadadhar, Shivasadi, Shri Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Ki Jai, Srila Krishna Das Kaviraj Goswami Prabhu Ki Jai, Shri Chaitanya Charitamrita Ki Jai, Srila Vrindavan Das Thakur Ki Jai, Shri Chaitanya Bhagavad Ki Jai, Narottam Srinivas Shamananda Prabhu Ki Jai. Jai Om Vishnupad Vishwavarena Srila Bhaktivedanta Swami Maharaj Prabhupada Ki Jai. Jai Om Vishnupad Srila Bhakti Nirmal Acharya Maharaj Ki Jai. Shri Chaitanya Saraswat Madhacharya Vrinda Ki Jai. Ananta Koti Vaishnava Vrinda Ki Jai. Shri Navadip Dham Ki Jai. Shri Ram Mayapur Ki Jai. Saparshada Shri Nityananda Prabhu Ki Jai. Saparshada Shri Mahaprabhu Ki Jai. Shri Kaladvip Ki Jai. Shri Chaitanya Saraswat Mat Ki Jai. Soquel Shri Chaitanya Saraswat Seva Ashram Ki Jai. Ganga Devi Ki Jai. Tulasi Madharani Ki Jai. Bhakti Devi Ki Jai. Shri Vrindavan Dham Ki Jai. Shri Shri Radha Krishna Go Gopi Govardhan. Shyam Kuna Radha Kunda Kalindi Yamuna Jo Ki Jai. Samaveda Bhakta Vrinda Ki Jai. Shri Harinam Sankirtan Ki Jai. All the assembled devotees Ki Jai. Gaur Premanande Hari Hari Bol.
Jai Om Vishnupad Srila Bhakti Pavan Janardan Maharaj Ki Jai.